enjoyed some of the rain. If you guys would go to God with me in prayer. Father God, we just come to you now, thanking you for the opportunity just to meet together. Lord, we just pray your blessing on this worship time that we have, your blessings on those who have prepared some thoughts from your word, Lord, to teach us, that we might just take what they have learned, and that it might be given from you to us, that we might be able to use and just to get an understanding, a deeper understanding of your word. God, we just pray that you watch over us the rest of this week. Just continue to bless us as you do. Lord, we thank you for the rain that we've had. We thank you for the sunshine today, and that is supposed to be here tomorrow. Lord, we just pray that you watch over us on this evening as we depart and go back to our homes, that you would just keep us safe and bring us back at the next appointed time. Lord, again, we thank you for all things that you do, but we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, the most. And we pray all this in his name. Amen. The first song this evening will be As the Deer. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Oh, my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what to worship you, oh my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. You are dismissed.
Okay. Okay. As far as I know, we have about 4 more weeks for this class. That would be the last class would be September 1st, and the new semester would begin the first Thursday after the first Sunday of September. That's barring any complications we may have as far as when we may be moving over into the new building and how things might get upset that way. But anyway, that's what I'm planning on, which means that we have 13 chapters and 4 weeks. So it's a little bit faster than what I've been doing, but I think we can do it. I would encourage you, and some of this I'm going to have to paraphrase, but I would encourage you to read the chapters and hopefully even read the chapters ahead of time. So if I paraphrase some things and I misspeak, you can go, oh, Jack, you forgot this, or you didn't say that, or whatever. And I would appreciate it. It's not like I would get upset that you're doing this unless you make a game out of it, But I don't think you'll do that. Tonight we're going to start in chapter 38. And this is sort of an aside, but it's important. There are 2 ideas that come from this. 2 things that come from this. One is continuing to track the genealogy of the promised seed, that is, of Christ. The promise is going to come through Judah. And in this chapter, we see how one of his descendants come into being. And one of his descendants that are mentioned in Jesus' genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. But it comes about in a rather odd, in a sad way, in a sense. And the other thing is that we'll see in this chapter is that the people, the sons of Jacob, are living in a rather corrupt environment, and there's a danger of his sons and grandchildren drifting into idolatrous practices and drifting away from the morality that God would want them to have. And so this is a sad chapter as well. I don't think I'll read the whole thing, but I'll sort of tell the story. First things first, there's a law that Moses wrote down in a part of the law of Moses, and it was called the Levirate law. And the idea, and you'll find it in Deuteronomy 25, starting in verse 5. And the idea here is, if a man has some brothers and he has a wife, and he dies and his wife is left childless, his brother, one of his brothers, is obliged to take her as a wife and have a child by her, and the first child would be considered as the deceased brother's child as far as the inheritance goes and that sort of thing. And we don't have that under the new covenant for a number of reasons. One of the things is we're going back to the original plan from Adam and Eve, one man, one woman, and a Levirate law sometimes would require a man to take a second wife. The other thing is perhaps just as important is back then, a widow had her children to depend on her husband and her children. If her husband died, if she had children, well, her children could help support her. But if she didn't have any children, what did she do? Well, it went back to her parents, but her parents are going to die before she does, and then what happens? Maybe she has brothers and sisters, maybe not. And so this is the predicament. And having children in that day and age, I mean, they're the ones that took care of you when you were sick, when you were old. They're the ones they were your Social Security. They were your Medicare. They were your nursing home. If you were without children and a widow, you were in tough shape. And under the new covenant, well, we have family to take, physical family to take care of our widows, but we also have church family to take care of our widows. If we don't take care of the widows and orphans, we're not practicing true religion, according to James. So we provide for our widows in a way in which, Jacob and his sons would not be able to. They didn't have a church family to do that sort of a thing. So, what happened? Judah married a Canaanite woman, and he had 3 sons. And his first son was named and it doesn't say why, it just says, but Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, and so the Lord took his life. Now, had a wife named Tamar, who was also a Canaanite. So died, Tamar was the widow left behind, and the next son in line was Onan. Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother. Onan knew that this is verse 9, Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so when he went into his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so he took his life also. So what was happening? Onan, we don't know what the penalties for Onan just being honest and saying, I don't want to do this. Under the law of Moses saying that, it was a public shame, but that was essentially the penalty. But Onan went ahead with the marriage, but he wasn't going to go ahead with the getting his new wife pregnant. He was deceiving her about the marriage. He was deceiving her about even trying to have a child. He was making sure that his seed would not go where it was going to produce a child. And it was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord took his life also. So he was using Tamar and cheating her out of something very vital to her life. And Judah, in verse 11, tells Tamar to go back to your father's house and leave as a widow until his youngest son gets a little older. But Judah wasn't really concerned about the age of his son quite so much as, well, I lost 2, and this lady must be jinxed or something because I don't want to lose my 3rd one. So a lot of time passes by, And Judah becomes a widower. His wife dies, and Tamar is living as a widow in her father's house, and Judah comes by in the area, and Tamar hears about it, and being impatient about, getting on with having a child through this family like she should have, she puts a veil on and dresses up like a prostitute and places herself in a place where Judah would come by. And Judah, being a widower, he sees this prostitute and he arranges for a price. I'll give you a goat if you let me come into you. And he said, I'll give you my signet ring and my staff. And later, when I get to the flock, I'll send it and I'll redeem my stuff from you. And so Judah gets unbeknownst to him, his daughter-in-law pregnant. She goes back, puts on the widow's clothes, and Judah sends his friend with the goat. And where's the prostitute? Where's the prostitute? And not only that, the word they use is, where's the temple prostitute? So not only was she dressed up like an ordinary prostitute, but she was dressed up like a prostitute who was working for a pagan idol, which is something the idolaters did back then. It's sort of like a percentage of their take would go to their god. She wasn't to be found. Oh, well. Take the goat back and not bother, and that's what happened. But was it 3 months or 2 months? A couple of months later, it was found out. It was found out that Tamar was pregnant. 3 months, in verse 24. Now, it was about 3 months later that Judah was informed, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she's also with child by harlotry. Then Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. She played the harlot. She was engaged to his son, and how dare she get pregnant by somebody else, right? That was adultery. And of course, she was going to be brought out to be punished, but she sends a messenger with the signet ring and the staff, and the messenger said, I'm pregnant by the man who owns these things. And of course, that was Judah. And to his credit, Judah was honest to fess up what had happened and to back off in his judgment. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not have relations with her again. So he saw her need and why she did what she did. What she did was not right. And what Judah did was not right either. But he saw that she was taking, things into her own hands, and that in this whole mess, that she had a case. And so he took her in. He didn't have her as a wife. He didn't go into her again as a husband-wife relationship, but he did take care of her and her sons. They were twins. One of the sons, named Zerah, poked his hand out early. They put a little ribbon around it, but he pulled his hand back in, and the other one popped out instead, so they named him Perez, means of breaking forth. And then Zerah came out, and these were the sons of Tamar, and Perez was the one who was going to be in the lineage of Christ. And there you have it. It's a rather sad story, but you can sort of see how there is a corrupting influence going on in amidst the sons of Jacob, and how God at that moment was pulling strings to get Jacob and his sons into Egypt, where they would be assigned a land that was separate from most of the Egyptians, the land of Goshen, and they would get this separate land. Why? Because the Egyptians thought shepherds were abominable. They didn't like shepherds. And so they would live in another land where they wouldn't be intermingling with as many people who would be leading them astray. And of course, as we see when we look through Exodus, Numbers, and so on, well, it helped, but it didn't do a perfect job of isolating them. So this was chapter 38, and the 39, we get back to the main course of things. God is working it out. Joseph was the favorite son of Jacob. His brothers were envious of him. He was rather, I guess you would say, rather naive in the way he presented the dreams that he had. But he did. And the dreams were prophetic, and the brothers didn't necessarily know it, that all of these 11 sheaves were bowing down to his sheaf, and the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to him. The idea would be that he would be ruling over his own family. Well, let's see what becomes of this dreamer. And they were envious, and they decided to get rid of him. First, try to kill him, and then maybe to leave him in a cistern. And finally, they ended up selling him into slavery. And so he was sent down to Egypt by a caravan of Midianites, and he was sold to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. In chapter 39, verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and became his personal servant, and made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. It came about that from that time he made him overseer in his house, and over all that he owned. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned, and the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. You go from being in chains as a slave, sold to this official in Egypt, and all of a sudden, well, maybe not all of a sudden, over a period of time, he became a trusted slave, and then he became in charge of everything that his master owned. And how does that happen? Well, God worked with him. And I can see two ways that God worked with him, and I think something that we can learn about it too. We're going to find challenges in our lives. We're not exempt from suffering. We're not exempt from being humiliated or pushed down, fired. All sorts of things can happen to us, jail. All sorts of things can happen to us, but that doesn't mean God is not with us. It didn't mean that God was not with Joseph when Joseph was sold into slavery. God was pulling strings. He knew what he was going to do with Joseph. There was a point to it all. And when Joseph was going through it, he didn't have a clue. What's going on here? He thought he was going to be his father's favorite son, in charge of the family, and running the family business, and had a bright future. And all of a sudden, here he was, being hauled down on a camel in chains and being sold as a slave. What's going on? And you could imagine. One thing that he had in his favor is that he still held on to God and his faith in God, and we can see that as we go on. And an aspect of that we can follow, and we can imply it from here, is that, yeah, maybe Joseph might have gone through a period of feeling sorry for himself and crying and weeping and missing his family. And maybe he went through a period of time where he was angry and maybe even angry at God. But somehow through it all, he did not become bitter toward God or toward life in general. And the reason I'm saying this is because he became a trusted servant of his new master. And if he had gotten all kind of, if he kept on getting bitter and gnarly, the only way he would trust Joseph under those conditions was if he had two other guards with Joseph with whips and maybe some spears to make sure he didn't run away and to whack him a few times if he didn't do what he was supposed to do. Somewhere along the line, Joseph got the idea that, okay, here I am. I'm going to do the best I can with what I've got and trust in God. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Joseph not only gets through it and stays faithful to God, he actually gets stronger.
Yes.
And it's almost like God was preparing him for, I mean, when he ends up, he's going to end up in some of the top ranking. And so, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, and in fact, what Joseph is getting some on-the-job training in a very real sense. I mean, he was learning about supervising people and about husbandry and about taking care of a household from his family, and now he's learning about working for an Egyptian official and some of the things that are involved with that. And he's also learning what it is to serve, and to serve God by serving others. And so because he is doing this, because he is submitting to his master and submitting to God and also in doing that, God was blessing him and blessing his efforts. You can do the best job you possibly can, but unless God blesses your efforts, it may not produce that much of a profit. So God's hand is in this. God's hand must have been in his heart, enabling him to rise above the hurt that he was feeling, to rise above the loneliness and the anger, the frustration of it all. I'm a free man. I need to be free, and wanting to break free, but instead getting the same kind of attitude that Paul was telling Christians to have if you had masters. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5, it says, "Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ. Not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. With good will render service as to the Lord, not to men, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free." I think we have every reason to believe that Joseph was doing the equivalent of this kind of a thing. He was being a reliable servant. And God enabled Potiphar to see and recognize that he was a reliable servant. Sometimes guys have reliable employees and they're just not appreciated, they're not noticed, and they don't get anywhere, and people are promoted over them sometimes. But God was making sure it didn't happen in this case. God was making sure that whatever Joseph did in his loyalty was successful enough for Potiphar to notice and say, "Hey, I got a good thing going here." And so here Joseph was rising in the ranks over time. And you're not going to get that way by a sour attitude. You're going to get that way by a servant's heart willing to do it God's way. And that's what happened. And you'd think, all right, now I'm in charge of all of Potiphar's stuff. And he's the captain of the guard in Egypt. And all of a sudden, God, pushed me down, and now he brought me back up, and he's helping me to be successful. And probably Joseph is feeling pretty good about his situation, not as good as his being home, but hey, it's working out. And then what happens? Potiphar's wife notices him in a wrong way, and she tries to seduce him. And day after day after day, she's pummeling him, and his job requires him to be in and out of the house and go by her, and there's no avoiding it. And day by day, he's saying no to her. How can I possibly do this? How can I possibly be disloyal to your husband who's given me all of this authority and all of this power? I can't betray him, and how can I betray God in doing this kind of evil thing? And day after day, he was saying no. You can contrast that with Judah passing by a prostitute, Well, here was Joseph maintaining his integrity. And of course, what happened was his wife was getting more and more desperate about the thing, and she grabbed his coat and said, "Lie with me." And of course, how do you get away? Well, the only way he could get away was to slip out of the coat, and ran out of the house. All right, he made his getaway, but what did she do? She yelled and screamed and got all the servants together, and then said that Joseph tried to rape her. And she left the coat there so that when her husband got back, she could accuse him again. And of course, who are you going to believe, your wife or your servant? Who had you better believe, your wife or your servant, right? So Potiphar sends Joseph to jail. You talk about a roller coaster ride. I mean, here's a guy trying to follow God, trying to do what's right. He's abased, and then he's exalted, and now he's abased again, and he's thrown into jail. And he doesn't know why. He doesn't know why, just that it happened. And that's the way our life goes, doesn't it? We're fired. We don't know why we're fired. Maybe 10 years later, we know we have a new career, and it would never have happened if we weren't humiliated and fired all the way back when, or whatever. We don't know the end while we're going through the beginning, and this is the way it is with Joseph. And so here he is in jail, and in jail, the Lord was with Joseph, verse 21 of chapter 39. That the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made him prosper. And once again, Joseph, by his actions, by his service, and by the Lord's help, he was able to overcome all of the frustration, the anger, and all of the rest of it that might have gone along with this. But not only that, but to be a good prisoner, to become a trustee, and then the most trusted trustee. I don't know if they had trustees like we have trustees, but it's sort of that idea, The ones that are always trying to escape, that always want to punch your face in, that keep in chains forever and ever, until they're let out or they're executed. But the ones who are cooperative and the ones who are willing to serve and to toe the line, they're given a little bit more, and they're given a little bit more. And of course, Joseph, he's a good kid. He's a good man who wasn't there because he was bad, and he wasn't acting bad when he was in jail. And so he got more and more and more and more responsibility until it was almost the same as it was with Potiphar. Everything in the jail was put under his command. He really liked that. Any questions or anything? So again, it's this idea, God exalts the humble. He was humble and let God raise him up. He wasn't spending all of his time as, why did you do this to me, God? He may have done that in the beginning, and he may have asked God, but he must have given it up somewhere along the line for him to behave in such a way that God could bless him and ingratiate himself into his new job, so to speak. You want to succeed in your job that you have? Do the best job you can, even if you think it's below your pay grade, or it's below what you deserve, and you're you're overqualified or whatever. And I deserve to be the boss of this place, not him. And the guy who's my boss is really a dummy. Do your best for the Lord's sake, not for your boss's sake, but for the Lord's sake. And people will see. And if your boss is not sharp enough to pick up on it, well, God can shift you over to somebody else. I mean, God's able to do that too, but you're serving him. And he can work with you. If you're antagonistic and pouty and have a chip on your shoulder, you're the guy that gets fired. Or if you're not fired, maybe you're the first one that gets laid off when the company another company buys your company. Managers don't want employees who are sour and growly and selfish. And the ones that are true servants are the ones that end up being exalted. A lesson for us. And we can change. Fortunately, we can change jobs. If we have a real a horrible boss, we can say, well, I'm sorry, it's not going to work out. I'm looking for something else. Joseph, he was stuck. Okay. There's no change except the Lord would go in and pluck him out. And sometimes God does that for us too, and you don't know it. Anyway, so here he is. What's going on? I was the favorite son. I was part of a big family, and I would be in charge of the whole deal, and a rich family, and then I became a slave, and then I became a chief steward of slaves, and now I'm in jail, and now I'm in charge of a jail. But what's all this about? Well, God needed him to meet some folks. And this is kind of a hard way to meet some folks, isn't it? To go through all of this. But God had plans, and he knew who he was going to meet. So what happened? He was in charge of this jail. In chapter 40, it says, it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the guard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned and was in charge. So Joseph was going to be, like bringing these guys the food and checking on their welfare and all of this kind of stuff. I don't know whether they let him out for exercise or whatever. I don't know what they did back then, but he was in charge. And he was dealing with all of the prisoners, and he was going to deal with the cupbearer and the baker of Pharaoh. And that was just the meeting that God wanted him to have at that particular moment. And it just so happened that at that time, the two of those prisoners had dreams, and it was puzzling to them. You know, what's going on? And and Joseph asked them about it, and they told their dreams. And the cupbearer dreamed a dream where he saw 3 branches of a grapevine with fruit, and he squeezed out the grapes into a cup, straining them into a cup, Pharaoh's cup, and he gave the cup to Pharaoh. And Joseph interpreted the dream, giving credit to God for the interpretation, that in 3 days, each of the branches stood for 3 days, and in 3 days, Pharaoh would restore to you your job. And the baker was all encouraged. Oh, maybe, how about me? And the baker's dream was, well, he had 3 baskets of bread on his head. And there were birds coming down on top and eating the bread up. And Joseph had to say, well, what that means is that the 3 baskets are 3 days, and the birds eating up the bread means that in 3 days the Pharaoh is going to have your head and give your body for the birds to eat. Of course, he wasn't too popular with that. But he asked the cupbearer, he said, when all of this happens, put in a good word to Pharaoh for me, please. I don't deserve to be here. And of course, Joseph was thinking, wow, okay, this is my chance. You know, I get in good with the cupbearer. The cupbearer has a true interpretation of a dream, and now he's going to get a word into Pharaoh, and maybe he'll get out of here, right? Or maybe he'll at least get a fair hearing and maybe another trial or something. It happens, the dream happens exactly the way Joseph says, but the cupbearer forgot about Joseph. So Joseph has to languish in jail for 2 more years. But as it turned out, it had to happen this way because Pharaoh had to have this dream. And the dream was something that none of his magicians or wise men could interpret. And, well, the cupbearer thought, wait a minute, there was a guy in jail a couple of years ago who interpreted the dream for me. Maybe he's the one to ask. And so they get Joseph out of jails to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And of course, that's going to be exactly where God wanted Joseph to be. And he had planned it all. He had all of this in his mind even before Joseph was thrown into that pit by his brothers. So, they clean Joseph up, he shaves, they bring him to Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh explains the dream and, you know, relates the dream, and Joseph interprets the dream. Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph. Well, let me see. He tells him the dream, and the dream was this: there were 7 fat cows coming up out of the Nile, and they were very fat, and they were very sleek, and they were just great cows. And then there were 7 really ugly cows, gaunt, starving to death cows, and they came up and they ate the healthy cows, the fat, healthy cows. What's that all about? And then he had another dream that was similar. There were 7 ears of grain that were very healthy and abundant, and then there arose 7 very lean, skinny grains, and they ate up the 7 fat grains. And nobody could figure out what it was, but Joseph did, where God revealed it to Joseph. In verse 25, he says, God has told Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt, and after them 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh's twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land. Let him exact a fifth of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. The proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. And then Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this in whom is a divine spirit?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has informed you of all of this, there's no one so discerning as wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all the people shall do homage. Only in the throne will I be greater than you." And so Pharaoh set Joseph over all of Egypt. Just like he was over all of Potiphar's house, like he was set all over the jail, now he was set over all of Egypt in preparing for this great famine that was going to extend to the known world at the time, or at least the world controlled by Egypt. And so here he is. He's 30 years old when this happened. He was 17 when he was sold into slavery. So for 13 years, what's going on, God? What's going on? I keep being knocked down. I'm knocked down and I'm lifted up, and I'm knocked down and I'm being lifted up. And now what? I'm being lifted up next to Pharaoh. And why? Well, it's because of the famine. And as we'll see, we're just about out of time, but as we see, Joseph is going to be an agent to save the known world in this famine, and not only save the known world, but also save his own family. There's a rather wonderful parallel here. The Bible doesn't really underline it, but it's there. I mean, what happened? To Jacob, he lost his son. His son was dead and gone. And to his sons, they knew better that he was a slave, but he might as well have been dead. And they put him to death. They put him out. They rejected him. And here Jacob's son was abased, lowered to the class of a slave and to a prisoner, and then he was exalted. And then, as we'll see, he comes back alive again to his brothers in providing them life out of a famine. But not only life out of a famine for his family, but also for the known world, for Egypt and all of the nations around where he would sell all of this food. And so you have this picture. It's not a picture that's developed in the New Testament. In a way, it's surprising. But maybe God felt it was so obvious. I don't know. But it seems pretty obvious to me that we have a picture here of the kind of thing that Jesus did. He was the Son of God, the exalted Son of God in all creation, but yet he humbled himself as a servant and submitted to the death of a criminal only to be raised again to save the world. And here we have a sort of a mimicking of that kind of a thing going on with Joseph. And we'll see it a little bit more as we go on. But it's a very exciting kind of a thing. Next time we'll go 42, 43. We'll do the next three chapters if we can. If you'd start from verse 46 and read on, no, 44 and read on from there, 41, 44. I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much.